Welcome to Smashed Avo Property. Today is the first of our Q&A session with a great friend of the podcast, Joey DeGarda. We are both ecstatic that so many of you are finding value in our content, and the feedback has been unbelievably overwhelming. Please keep sending through your questions. No question is too silly to ask, and there's probably thousands of other people out there thinking about exactly the same thing. So feel free to shoot them through to hi@jordandeyoung.com. As always, seek your own professional financial, legal, taxation, and property investing advice for your current situation. Everything we talk about is just our opinion and general in nature and should never be considered as personal advice. So without any further ado, let's get house hunting with Joey. What is going on, guys? It is Jordan DeYoung.
And this is Joey DeGarda.
And we are back again. It is Q&A day, mate. Oh, that's what a couple of other podcast hosts call it. I don't know. We'll have to come up with our own name of Q&A day, Joey. But essentially, we're ready to do some question and answers from some of the listeners. And we got a couple each that you guys have sent across, and we're super keen to delve into them. I actually haven't, I've read the questions, but I haven't prepared anything. Have you prepared anything, Joey?
Mate, this is the first time I've actually opened the questions up. So I don't have anything pre-written, but just wanted to, at the top of the podcast, just let the listeners know if they do have any content or any questions that they'd like to ask, be it general or kind of a little bit more specific to you, feel free to write them in. And just a quick little disclaimer that these are just our personal opinions. We don't know your personal circumstances. So, take this with a grain of salt.
Yeah, 100%. There's nothing, no personal financial advice or anything here. This is just off the top of our heads as well, guys. So I'm just reading through the question now, and some of them are pretty specific, and we might not have the exact answer, but I think we'll try and just answer these in, the approach that we would take, or, if you were to call one of us up as advisors and ask the question, I think, this is sort of the typical answer that we'd get without knowing, your specific financial circumstances. But I reckon we'll just delve straight in. Yeah, Joey?
Yeah, let's get going.
All right. First person I've got two questions from, and it's from Jesse. And Jesse has said, is the first home owner's grant $10,000 direct to me or off the price of the house?
So it kind of depends on what you're using the purchase for. So you're entitled to that $10,000 grant whether you need it or whether you don't. So, for example, my old man, I've already given a couple of shout-outs being the solicitor that he is, has a client who doesn't need the $10,000 first home owner's grant, but the fact that they're buying a brand new property and they're eligible for the $10,000, why would you say no to basically a free $10,000? So the answer is the money can go directly to you, but if you do need it for settlement, you'll be using it for settlement. But if you have the funds and you don't need it at settlement, then you can receive those funds directly to yourself.
Yeah, and in a case where, someone was actually to use it, it happens at settlement time. So the conveyancer or the solicitor that you've had should be able to sort out all those financials and get a total figure ready for you that you need to pay, that, they'll align with the bank and your broker and everyone else who is involved. And if you are utilizing that $10,000 towards, the total settlement fund, you generally won't see it. So the second question that I've got from Jesse is, how much would a first home buyer actually need for a house deposit? I know the federal scheme is 5%, but would banks even give you the borrowing capacity to purchase if you can't demonstrate much savings?
In short, if you cannot show serviceability on that 95% loan, then you won't get the money. So you need to be able to actually service the loan. But if, for example, you can service that 95% lend and your broker or your banker says that, hey, we can get you that 5% loan, then I know the guidelines are different in each state. So if you're buying here in New South Wales and you're buying under $650,000, you're going to be stamp duty free. So you don't have to pay any stamp duty. And if you've got that, say you're buying for 600 grand, so you fall under that stamp duty threshold here in New South Wales, you need as little as 5% deposit. So you'll need that $30,000 as your 5% to purchase that property as your deposit, plus all your purchasing costs. So your conveyancing, your strata, or your building and pest, or your buyer's agency fee. So they're the kind of hidden costs that you don't think about. But if you fall under that stamp duty threshold, you can get away with as little as 5% plus purchasing costs on this occasion here in New South Wales. Do you want to speak a little bit to Victoria there, Jordan?
Yeah, same in Victoria. I mean, you really got to understand what the hidden costs are, and I think you touched on a really good point there, Joey, with the hidden costs. You know, they're things that you don't generally think about when you purchase a property. And I was just listening to your recent podcast, Joey, about doing some of the modelling that you did around the purchases, and it's easy for people to just presume, okay, if I'm buying a property for $500,000, I only need $25,000 a deposit, and that's it. Well, no, you actually need stamp duty and solicitor fees and all the rest of it as well. So just be very mindful of all the additional costs that come along with it. And I think, a big emphasis does come onto incomes. Like if you're going to focus on one thing, if you're really good at saving money and have a big deposit, but you don't have a solid income, I think, if that's the one thing that you focus on, then you should. That serviceability is really crucial to being able to borrow, any amount of money really. So our second question, or our third question, is from Tristan. Can we really continue to see housing prices double every 7 to 10 years? That means that a $1 million house could be worth $2 million in 2030, $4 million in 2040, and $8 million in 2050. Now, I'll jump in on this one. And I think, we have had 30 years of really strong economic growth, and we don't know if we're going to see that in the future. No one has a crystal ball, and no one can really see what is going to happen in the future. But from my retrospect and sort of what I've been listening to and from other advisors and what I'm hearing out there in the market, there's a lot of talk of this sort of 7 to 10 year process now taking 15 years or being a bit longer than that 7 to 10 year cycle. Obviously, there's going to be ebb and flows. We're going to see, times in the market where, the market's booming and times in the market where the market's slowing. Is it going to double every 7 to 10 years? No one really knows. You can't really predict that stuff. All we can do is sort of look at history and see how it's performed and, seeing what the indicators are in history. I mean, one of the biggest indicators is, or one of the biggest impacts on property prices over the last 30 years is really, the females or the double income families coming into the workforce. And so instead of just having one family member, going to work and bringing in income, we now have serviceability for two incomes in the family, in the household. And that's really increased, serviceability levels and all that sort of stuff moving forward. Additionally, on top of that, we're in the lowest interest rate environment that we've ever been in Australia, and that increases serviceability again. So essentially, as I always say, the property game is really a finance game, and having access to getting finance. And, I think all these additional things historically in Australia has allowed, us to borrow these sorts of money. But, also back then lending was completely different as well. People were able to borrow 10, 20 times their income, where now really we're seeing, 6 to 8 times our income being able to borrow. So it's a bit of a different market and a bit of a different financial world. But, I think we're going to see different regulations and government policies and all that sort of stuff change in the future. But yeah, I don't know. What do you see there, Joey?
Well, look, mate, the way I see it is, again, as you've touched on, I look back on historical data, and obviously it makes a difference with what you're actually buying. If you're buying a phenomenal freestanding house in a great pocket in a capital city versus if you're buying something out in the middle of Australia, you're probably going to see two different results there. So buying well and buying the right property obviously is the massive caveat to this. But and I've said it in one of my podcasts, I use my parents' family home as an example, bought for $90,000 in 1987. And it's basically done the modeling that that Tristan's actually asked us, and it's almost doubled in that 7 to 10 year window. And it's done that, and it's probably worth around the two, maybe a little bit more, $2 million mark today. So just a humble, solid brick home in a spot 6 or 7 Ks away from the CBD in Sydney, and it's done exactly that. So if we're looking back at the historical data and we're buying the right types of asset, that owner-occupier appeal, as much land as possible, and we're sticking to the fundamentals, then there's no reason why we're not going to see the growth. Whether it's going to be doubling every 7 to 10 years, as you've already said, we're not fortune tellers and we don't have a crystal ball, but it will perform well and it will grow at that rate. I'm not too sure. It might take 12 years to double. It might take 15 years, as you've touched on. But mate, if it by 2050 it goes to 6 million or 7.5 rather than 8, I'm still not too upset.
Exactly. And I think, that's the sort of the way we should look at these numbers. Like if you take that exact example and you go back to when they bought it for $90,000, I don't think they would have ever imagined that it'd be worth $2 million, unless they were doing, some pretty heavy modeling back then. But, and that's the way we should look at, the $8 million in 2050. It looks out of hand now. It looks like it's ridiculous. It looks like it's never going to happen. But, if we go on that historical example, it has happened in the past. So you can't rule it out. Our fourth question comes from James. When you sign a contract with a 10% deposit, what does that actually mean? And when do you have to pay that 10%? How does the remaining work when you settle on the property and have the stamp duty on top of that?
So with that one, if you negotiate well, or not even negotiate well, but if the vendor solicitor, so the seller solicitor agrees, you can often get that 10% deposit reduced to 5% deposit, which means you'll only need that 5% to actually exchange contracts. You'll need the additional 5% later on, depending on whether you can get a 95 or 90% lend. So you will need that additional 5%, but there are circumstances where you can put down as little as 5% on exchanging. So to answer that question, you don't necessarily need the full 10%, but if you did put down that full 10%, the remaining is all done through the solicitor. So if you have a great solicitor or a great conveyancer, they will take care of the rest for you. They'll instruct you on how much money you need to have in your nominated bank account. They'll look after the money coming across from your particular lender, and they'll obviously factor in the stamp duty that needs to be paid as well. Just before settlement, they'll give you a statement there that shows how much you need and what it's broken down into, and just making sure that you have that sufficient funds in the account at least a couple of days before the actual settlement.
Yeah, I think probably a scenario that I just went through, I'll add to that as well, is the cooling off period. So obviously in New South Wales, you put down a 0.25% sort of holding deposit when you're negotiating on a property, or through the cooling off period. Here in Victoria, it's just $1,000. But yeah, essentially that's sort of like a little holding deposit. And then if you do what Joey says and get that 5%, deposit down after the cooling off period has sort of finished, that's when you pay that 5%, and then the remaining at settlement, as Joey just explained. So the next question from James is, I've also heard that you can have special conditions in your contract, such as subject to finance. If those conditions aren't met, do I get a full 10% deposit back?
So if you've exchanged on the property, you're not going to get your deposit back. So unfortunately, if you can't meet your financial commitments and you don't get that approval once you've already formally exchanged, then you won't be able to get that 10% deposit back. In the example that you've touched on there, where you sign and in New South Wales, you put down a 0.25% deposit, or in Victoria, you put down that $1,000 and you've unable to get that finance and you pull out within that cooling off period. So let's say you exchanged on a Tuesday and your broker on Thursday said, this is not looking very likely, we're not going to get the finance. You can pull out and you don't need to pay the 10% deposit, but you will forfeit that 0.25% in New South Wales, and you'll forfeit that $1,000 in Victoria.
Yeah, and I think that's why, Joey and I always bang on about doing your due diligence or as much as possible before you even, put an offer on or do, just get your financer pre-approved, get your building and pest inspection done, review a strata report. I personally think, instead of putting $1,000 down as a sort of holding deposit, I'd much rather pay, $300 and get a strata report done and check that than lose the $1,000. So do as much due diligence as you can up front. Obviously, if you're not in a position where you can't do that and you have to act fast on the property, then that might be a position that you have to go down. But yeah, just do as much due diligence as you can up front and save yourself that initial holding deposit if you can. So the next question from Aaron is, I feel like if I don't get in the market now, I'm going to miss out. Although I've only got $400K as a maximum borrowing amount, I don't think this would buy me a property you guys would consider an A-grade investment property. Is it worth buying a B or C grade property now, or holding off until I can borrow more to get in an A-grade property?
Yeah, really hard without knowing Aaron's particular kind of circumstances and whether Aaron's buying an investment property or buying a place to live in. And that's going to be the major one for me. What's his motive? Is it an investment or is it an owner-occupier? If it's an investment, then I'd say sure. There's plenty of places that are where you would be able to spend that. I'm not sure if that $400K is total borrowing power, so as in he's got a deposit on top of that, or if $400,000 is the total purchase price. So let's just say and read that at face value, and there's 400K borrowing, so probably going to have maybe a 40 or even 80%, $80,000 deposit on top of that. So if we're talking mid fours to potentially even high fours, there's great buying if it's an investment. You could be buying a house not too far from the CBD in Brisbane. You could be buying an apartment in this market right now, potentially even not too far from the CBD here in Sydney, in some great areas that I would see as investable. If you're buying for the owner occupier and you want to buy in an area where an apartment's going to cost you 600 grand, well then, yeah, potentially you may need to change tack, and you may need to go, well, maybe is rent vesting for me? Or if it's definitely that owner occupier that you want, then my personal opinion is I would wait out until you had enough skin in the game to reach out for at least that B grade property. You don't want to be going into that C grade territory, as it really could hinder you, particularly if it's that first purchase. If you want that first one to be sound, solid, that one that's going to propel you into the next and the next and the next from there. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that one, Jordan.
Yeah, I'm on the same wavelength there. I think, a lot of the way I used to think about it, or the way I currently still do think about it, I mean, if you can save quicker than the market's going up, then you're better off just saving while you can. But the contrary to that as well is, the market just doesn't go up altogether. There's sub-markets within sub-markets, there's streets within sub-markets, and there's properties within streets. Like you're actually buying a specific property, you're not buying the market. So, and I think this is where he's coming from with a B or C grade property. So, if you're in the position where, you're still saving strong and you're able to hold out until, you can afford to leverage up a little bit further, then I probably would do that. Obviously you're going to have to get personal financial advice about this, but if a B grade property is something that you would consider, and you're happy to hold on to it for the long term, then I'm sure you will see some decent growth out of it, over a long term period. But yeah, I think Joey's spot on there. You don't want to get stuck in anything less than a B grade property, and obviously throughout your property plan over time, you're going to have to go through different stages such as consolidation, debt reduction, and your exit strategy. So I'd really map out what that looks like for you, whether it's buying 10 properties, selling off 5 of them and paying out the debt of the other ones, or if it's buying 5 properties, paying the debt off over time and then living off the rental income. I mean, you've really got to figure out what your exit strategy is first, and how possibly a B grade property would fit in there. And if it doesn't, I'd focus on the A grade property. I've got one final question here from Liam. I would love to hear more detail about what happens when a building and pest inspection report comes back with an adverse features and the renegotiation for a new purchase price. I've been seeing quite a few of them in my job and just want to get some more understanding on that renegotiation process. What are your rights for this sort of thing? Yeah, so I think, again, this sort of bangs on about doing your due diligence before you even put an offer in. I mean, I personally have never got a building and pest inspection before I've even put an offer on. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't really personally gone through this circumstance before. But yeah, essentially I would be holding off making any offers before you do get a building and pest inspection back, especially if you're putting down, a holding deposit or anything like that. Have you been through this circumstance before, Joey?
I have for a client of mine, and who didn't want to get the report until his offer was accepted. So much, I'm of the same belief as you. Get the report done, because it could cost you a lot if there are adverse findings in there, and it's too little too late once we've exchanged contracts. So he didn't want to do that, and he wanted to get the agreed price first and then worry about the diligence later. So as much as I pushed, I wasn't going to argue with my client over that if that was his decision at the end of the day, which we ended up doing. So we exchanged on the property. And then in the due diligence period, in the cooling off period, we did get that building and pest report. And in the building report, there came back some things that, our solicitor said that it was completely fine. Like, it's just wear and tear, age. It was a solid brick property built in the 50s. And my client was like, well, why can't we take some money off because the gutters need repairing? Well, the gutters are going to need repairing over time anyway, so it's kind of the property that you're inheriting. So if you're in that period where you haven't yet formally exchanged, you do have a little bit of leeway that you can go back and say, oh, well, I need to do X, Y, Z, and I've got this quote, and this quote, and it's going to cost me $20,000. Can you shave a little bit off there? But it comes down to the vendor. The vendor can just say no. So unless you've got that before you've while you're in that negotiation phase, and then you can use that as a tactic, then absolutely it's a great tool to have. It's a good bargaining chip. But once you've already signed contracts and you put down deposits, it's almost too little too late, because you're already shown your cards, you're committed to it, and the vendor can turn around and just say no. So definitely I'm on your side of the fence there when you say get your due diligence done, get it done very, very early if you can, even before you're making those offers.
And just to add in slightly there, your emotions do play with you in these sort of heated moments as well, because you're already half in. You've already put that, $1,000 down or 0.25% in New South Wales, and you've already got your toe in the water. So, if your building report comes back and it says you're going to have to pay, 25 grand in repairs, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot there, really, if you haven't done your due diligence beforehand, because you're either going to lose out on that $1,000 or you're going to have to try and renegotiate the price of the property, or you're going to have to pull out completely and lose your holding deposit. So again, just do as much as you can beforehand. But that's it from me. I think, Joey, you got a couple of questions too, yeah?
Mate, I do. I'm going to shoot them across here. So I got one from Edward here. Hey, I'm not too comfortable with debt, but I can borrow enough for a two-bedder worth, say, $750. Should I stretch myself to this level, or should I stick with a one-bedder around the $550K mark in a similar area?
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting question, and obviously, I'm going to presume that you don't have any other properties in your portfolio yet. Debt is a very interesting thing, and I think it takes a long while for someone to really come to terms with how they look at debt, how they feel about debt, and you got to understand good debt from bad debt. We grow up with credit cards and car loans and personal loans, and that's considered bad debt, and it does have that really negative connotation. But good debt, that allows you to leverage into an asset that's going to grow over time. Once you come to terms with it, it actually makes sense to do something. Obviously, not financial advice, but I think that's the way I've sort of grown to understand debt so far. And in terms of the one better or the two better, again, it's something that you got to be more comfortable with. If you're not going to be able to sleep at night, stretching yourself to that 750K, and it's going to be not the end of the world, but you're going to be uncomfortable with it, then I personally wouldn't do it. I love my 8 hours of sleep every night, but obviously, once you're comfortable with debt, getting into a two better that is going to potentially grow more than the one better, and that's something that you have to do due diligence on. You actually do have to see how historically they have grown, the one better versus the two better. Obviously you're going to be better off in 20-30 years when you see some more growth out of that two better, but again, it comes completely down to your risk profile. I mean, how do you feel about that, Joey?
Well, I'm going to give my short answer as listen to my latest podcast, where it's pretty much exactly answers this question. It's, should I buy a one better or a two better? So for me, yes, your two better is going to have that wider appeal later on down the track. You're going to have potentially more buyers because there's more bedrooms and there's a little bit more demand for it. But in saying that, if the one better is all that you feel comfortable with, like my best performing asset is a one bedroom apartment because it's just located in a fabulous spot. So I'm not here to discredit the one betters, because that's my favorite property is my one better, one of my one betters, sorry. But to answer the question and to give it a further breakdown, I've done some modeling and a little bit of math around that. So jump onto my podcast and you'll hear my side of the story there, Edward. I'll jump into the next one, which has come through from Lauren, who says, I feel like there's nothing new online and it always seems like I just see the same stock. Is this because of the market that nothing new is coming online on realestate.com and Domain? I assume that they mean the current coronavirus-y period that we see ourselves in.
Yeah, if we are talking about the current market that we're in, it is quite hard. There is a bit of a shortage of stock on the market at the moment, and I think there are a lot of people who are scared to list their properties. They're scared to put their properties on the market. They've got repayment holiday. So if they are in financial hardship, that there's no real need or urgency to put their property on the market. So it is a little bit hard. But I think one of the scenarios that Joey and myself have just gone through, Joey being my buyer's agent, is what we are starting to see is a whole bunch of off market properties come, or be on listing agents, statuses and email updates and all that sort of stuff. And so although you're not seeing a lot maybe for face value on REA and Domain, there is sort of a hidden market there where I think a lot of vendors are, just talking to these real estate agents and saying, hey, I am interested in selling my property. Can we sort of just have a feel of how the market is and what's happening and all that sort of stuff? And I think there probably was a whole bunch of listings that sort of put on hold and pulled off the market while coronavirus just kind of started. There was that initial sort of fear and everyone just sort of jerked their listing off the market. There was a ban on auctions and no one really knew what was going on. And I think now, we're sort of starting to see those listings come back online and sort of seeing agents starting to indicate that they have a bit of off-market stock. And so, what you see on these large platforms isn't, a real true indication of everything that is on the market. And I think, if you're still looking and you can't find anything new, just call the local agents, call the people in the area and just say, hey, this is what I'm looking for. What have you got? What's on your books? Are you talking to anyone? Is there any vendors that, are thinking of selling, but, haven't really engaged or proceeded further because they don't think there are any buyers? And that way you're sort of qualifying yourself to the real estate agent to say, hey, if anything does come up, this is my criteria and this is what I'm looking for. Let me know about it. And they can relay that on to, potential vendors and maybe find a property that isn't actually on the market, but now would be on the market now because, there's someone with a bit of interest. What do you see there, Joey?
Yeah, look, as I'm speaking to agents on a kind of daily or weekly basis, and they're saying that at least there's kind of 30 to 40% of stock that's trading behind the scenes. Only one of my last 6 purchases for clients have been listed on realestate.com or Domain. So just to give you an indication of how much is actually moving behind the scenes. And like I've got a close mate of mine who's bugging me as well, saying there's just nothing else that's coming up online. I just don't see anything new, but there is a world of property that are transacting behind closed doors. So you just need to make your voice known and just put your hand up and as you've said, make those cold calls to agents or get a buyer's agent or a strategist that's on your side to actually do that work for you, because there is stock that is out there. But as you've touched on, now that there's a little bit more confidence back in the market, I know particularly here in Sydney anyway, that there are a few listings that are starting to creep back online, vendors that are starting to dip their toes in going, okay, I'm not going to see that 15% loss I was maybe going to see a couple of months ago. There's a little bit more confidence back. I can probably fetch a half decent price for my property. So they are starting to come back online. But yeah, there is a whole world of property that is transacting behind the scenes. So make sure that you can get your hands on that stock. Jordan, I've got one last one here that's come through from Dan. And it's a very common one. It's one I get all the time from close friends of mine and family as well. And it's simply this: I've got a 10% deposit already saved. What is the next step? So what should I do next?
2 words: mortgage broker. Or if you want to go 1 word, finance. And essentially that's what I say to everyone who asks me this question as well, is go and approach a mortgage broker, go and approach someone I definitely recommend a mortgage broker because they have a wide range of packages. And if you go to one bank, and I think we've touched on this in a previous podcast, but if you go to one bank, they're only limited to the products and the rates that one bank gives you. But if you go to a mortgage broker, they've got options for multiple different banks in multiple different rates and everything else. So essentially what you're doing there is assessing your serviceability, assessing how much you are able to borrow and ensuring that you can get a pre-approval for that type of property. Would you be in the same boat there, Joey?
Mate, 1,000%. That is the very first thing that I do is I direct them, even if they were to go to a buyer's agent or something like that, like myself first, I'm going to say, well, I have no idea how much you can borrow because I don't know your personal financial situation. So the first step is to 100% sort out your finance. And I couldn't agree with you more. I'd be referring on to a mortgage broker, go and determine your borrowing capacity, have a look at your serviceability, see what you can comfortably manage, and then you can start actually having a look at the properties first. There's no point jumping online and being frustrated with the amount of stock or the lack thereof if you don't know how much you can even borrow. So that is the number one thing you should do. It's free to go and get some advice from a mortgage broker to get them to assess your situation and give you your borrowing power and let them know your serviceability. So completely free. So don't think that you have to go and fork out a couple of $100 or $1,000 or whatever it is. So a fabulous asset to have on your side, and it is definitely the first step that you should be taking. I just wanted to wrap up that kind of question there with like, just because you think that it's a common question, feel free to write it in. Don't feel too, I don't know, threatened or nervous to write something in, even if it does seem as simple as what is the very first step that I should take, because I love those kind of questions. It's one that I get on a really regular basis. So feel free to write in question, no matter how simple you think it might be.
100%. And if you want any more sort of personal advice, feel free to reach out to both Joey or I. Joey's email is joey@estroproperty.com and I'm just hi@jordandeong.com. And we're more than happy to get into any more personal circumstances with you in that area. But I think, you know, these have been some great questions, guys. We really appreciate you coming back to us. And it's awesome to know that there are actually some solid listeners out there and getting value out of this content and wanting to interact with us. We absolutely love it. So if there is any more feedback, feel free to give us a review on iTunes or any of the platforms that you're listening to, and reach out with any other questions. We'll continue this series going forward. And once we amass, 10 or more questions or something, we'll kick off the next one. So really keen, guys. Thank you so much for reaching out. Really appreciate it. And Joey, mate, once again, you've been an absolute legend.
Mate, thanks so much. And thanks, listeners. We'll catch you next episode.
Again, a massive thank you to everyone who wrote in. We really appreciate it. And I'm sure many others who have similar types of questions got a ton out of it too. I'm always looking for more guests to come onto the show. If you're under 30 and have one or more investment properties, whether it's good, bad, or ugly, I would love to talk to you about it. Even if you're interested into getting into the property sector, let's have a chat. The main focus is to help other soon-to-be young investors with tips and tricks along the journey, learn from the mistakes that we have made, and ignite the fire to set themselves up financially for the rest of their lives. If you're interested in sharing a story, you can go to jordandeong.com/podcast, where there's a podcast inquiry button at the top that will guide you through the next steps. If you want to see what else I'm up to, you can go to YouTube and type in Jordan De Jong, where you'll find the Smashed Avo Property podcast being hosted on YouTube and plenty of other content that I'm putting out consistently. If you're keen for more content like this, make sure you subscribe and please leave us a review with any feedback for future podcasts. And until next time, happy house hunting.